Hello, dear dreamer. Tonight, let me take you to a place where the world slows down, where the air is filled with gentle whispers and the trees hold stories as old as time. This is not just any forest, but the Whispering Forest, a magical haven nestled far from the clamor of daily life. Close your eyes and imagine yourself standing at the edge of this ancient place. The sun is setting, painting the sky with hues of gold and lavender. The wind carries a soft melody, almost as though it's calling your name. You take a step forward, leaving behind the worries of the day. And so, our story begins. Ira stood at the edge of a small garden, the soft scent of lavender wafting through the cool evening air. Her village of Eloria, tucked between rolling hills and meadows, was quiet now, the last rays of the sun bathing the cottages in a warm, golden glow. Beyond the village lay the Whispering Forest, a place of mystery and wonder that the elders spoke of in hushed tones. Beware the forest, they would say. Its whispers will draw you in, and you may never return. But Ira wasn't afraid. The whispers didn't feel ominous to her. They felt inviting. Tonight, they seemed to hum a melody she couldn't resist, like a lullaby meant just for her. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, she stepped onto the path leading toward the forest. Her heart beat steadily, not with fear, but with curiosity. What lay beyond the trees? Chapter 1: The Enchanted Entrance. The Whispering Forest greeted Ira with a cool breath of wind that brushed her cheeks and carried the scent of moss and wildflowers. She paused at the edge, gazing at the towering trees. Their leaves shimmered faintly in the twilight, as though catching the last bits of sunlight. The whispers were louder here, though still soft and elusive, like the rustling of leaves in a breeze. As she stepped into the forest, the air around her changed. It was cooler, as if she had passed into another world, and filled with a soothing hum that seemed to emanate from every direction. Shafts of golden light filtered through the canopy above, casting shifting patterns on the forest floor. She paused to take it all in. The ground beneath her feet was soft, covered in moss and scattered leaves. Wildflowers in shades of violet and white lined the path, their faint glow casting a gentle light. She knelt to touch one, marveling at the way it seemed to pulse softly, as though it were alive. "Welcome, traveler," a whisper seemed to say, though Ira couldn't tell if it came from the wind, the flowers, or the trees themselves. She walked on, her steps slow and deliberate, her senses drinking in the sights and sounds around her. As she moved deeper into the forest, she began to notice tiny creatures flitting about in the undergrowth. A firefly hovered near her face, its golden light bright enough to illuminate the faint freckles on her nose. It blinked twice, then darted away, joining a small cluster of others that danced like stars come alive. Further along the path, a rustling sound caught her attention. She turned to see a squirrel perched on the low branch of a tree, its bushy tail twitching. It tilted its head at her, its dark eyes filled with curiosity. "Hello there," Ira said softly, smiling. The squirrel chittered in response, then leapt to another branch, its movements quick and graceful. Ira watched as it darted through the trees, as though urging her to follow. She stepped carefully off the path, her feet sinking slightly into the soft moss, and followed the squirrel's trail. It led her to a small clearing where the trees arched overhead. their branches intertwining to form a natural dome. The air here was still and heavy with the scent of pine and earth. At the center of the clearing stood a tree unlike any Ira had ever seen. Its trunk was wide and gnarled, its bark shimmering faintly in the dim light. The roots twisted across the ground like veins, and its branches stretched high into the sky, disappearing into the canopy. Ira felt a pull toward it, an inexplicable urge to place her hand against its bark. As soon as her fingers touched the tree, a soft, resonant whisper filled the air around her. "You are welcome here," the voice said, warm and soothing. "Why have you come?" Ira stepped back, startled. She looked around the clearing, but there was no one else in sight. I don't know," she said aloud. "I felt drawn here. I think I'm looking for something." The tree's leaves rustled, though there was no wind. The forest calls to those who seek. Listen carefully, and you may find what you need. Iris stared at the tree, her heart racing with a mix of awe and curiosity. "What is this place?" she asked. "It is where the world listens," the voice replied, soft and deep, "and where you may hear yourself." The whispers grew quieter then, fading into the gentle rustling of the leaves. Ira stepped back, the weight of the moment settling over her like a warm blanket. As she turned to leave the clearing, she noticed a small, glowing object fluttering down from one of the tree's branches. It was a single golden leaf, its edges shimmering as though dipped in sunlight. Ira reached out and caught it in her hands. The leaf was warm to the touch, and as she held it, she felt a faint vibration like a heartbeat. "Keep this," the voice said, now only a soft whisper. "It will light your path." Ira nodded, clutching the leaf tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if the tree could hear her. As she stepped back onto the path, the golden leaf glowing softly in her hand, she felt a new sense of purpose. The forest was alive, and it had welcomed her. Whatever lay ahead, she knew she was meant to follow the whispers deeper into the heart of this magical place. Chapter 2: The Guardian Oak. Ira walked deeper into the forest, the glowing leaf in her hand casting a soft light on the path before her. The forest felt alive in a way she couldn't quite explain. Every rustle of the leaves, every whisper of the wind, seemed purposeful, as though the trees themselves were watching her progress. The path wound gently between the trunks of ancient trees, their roots curling over the ground like the fingers of giants. As Ira walked, she couldn't help but reach out to touch the bark of the trees she passed. Each one felt different, some smooth, others rough and knotted. Some were cool to the touch, while others seemed to radiate a faint warmth. After a while, the path opened into another clearing, larger than the first. At the center stood a massive oak tree, its trunk so wide that 10 people holding hands might not have been able to encircle it. The tree's bark was dark and deeply furrowed, its surface etched with patterns that looked almost like runes. Its branches stretched high into the sky, disappearing into the canopy, and its roots sprawled across the clearing like the limbs of a sleeping beast. Ira stopped, staring up at the oak in awe. There was something profoundly old about this tree, something ancient and wise. It was as if the oak had been here since the beginning of time, a silent witness to the world's stories. She took a step closer, the glowing leaf in her hand growing brighter as she approached. The air around her seemed to shift, becoming heavier, as though the space around the oak was sacred. "Come closer, child," a voice said, soft and resonant. Ira froze. The voice didn't come from anywhere specific. It seemed to echo through the air, vibrating in her chest. She looked around the clearing, but there was no one there. "Do not be afraid," the voice said. "I am the guardian oak. You have come seeking, have you not?" "Yes," Ira whispered, her voice barely audible. She stepped closer to the tree, her heart pounding. "I think so. I don't know exactly what I'm looking for, but I felt drawn here." The oak's branches rustled gently, though there was no wind. "The forest calls to those who need it," the voice said. "Tell me, what is it you seek?" Ira hesitated, struggling to put her feelings into words. "I've been feeling lost," she admitted, "like there's too much noise in the world, and I can't hear my own thoughts. I just wanted peace, clarity." The oak hummed softly, its voice low and comforting. "Peace is not something you find," it said. "It is something you create. But clarity comes when you listen." Ira tilted her head, the glowing leaf in her hand pulsing faintly. "Listen to what?" "To the whispers," the oak said. "To the wind, the trees, and the stream. But most of all, to yourself." Ira frowned, her brow furrowing. "I don't understand." "You will," the oak said simply. "In time." One of its massive branches dipped low, and from it, another glowing leaf detached and floated down toward Ira. She reached out and caught it, her hands trembling. The leaf was identical to the one she already held, its surface warm and faintly pulsing. "This will light your way," the oak said, "and protect you from the shadows." "The shadows?" Ira asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The oak's voice grew softer, almost mournful. "Even in a place of light, shadows linger. They are not to be feared, but they must be faced." Ira nodded slowly, though she didn't fully understand. She tucked the second leaf into the folds of her shawl, feeling its warmth against her chest. "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere. The oak's branches swayed gently, as if bowing. "Go now, child," it said. "The forest has more to show you." Ira stepped back onto the path, the glowing leaf lighting her way once more. As she left the clearing, she glanced back at the oak. It stood silent and still, its great branches stretching toward the heavens. As she walked, the forest seemed to shift around her. The trees grew taller, their trunks more closely packed, and the air grew cooler. The whispers grew louder, though they were still soft, as if the forest was speaking to her in a language she was just beginning to understand. Ira's thoughts wandered as she walked. She thought about the oak's words. "Peace is something you create. Clarity comes when you listen." What did that mean? She had come here seeking answers, but the answers she was finding seemed to come in riddles. The path curved gently, leading her deeper into the forest. The light from the glowing leaf cast long shadows on the ground, and the whispers seemed to weave together into a gentle melody. For the first time in a long time, Ira felt calm. The weight she had been carrying in her heart seemed lighter, as though the forest itself was sharing her burden. She smiled softly to herself, the glow of the leaf reflecting in her eyes. Whatever lay ahead, she knew she was ready to face it. Chapter 3. The Singing Stream. Ira continued along the winding path, the glowing leaf in her hand a steady companion in the deepening forest. The air around her grew lighter, filled with a faint, melodious sound. It was soft at first, like the distant hum of a lullaby, but as she walked, the sound grew clearer, a series of rippling notes that seemed to rise and fall with the rhythm of her footsteps. Curiosity quickened her pace. The whispers in the trees blended with the melody, weaving a soothing harmony that filled her chest with warmth. She followed the sound until the path opened onto the edge of a stream. The water sparkled like liquid crystal, catching the light from the glowing leaf she carried. Its surface reflected the soft green of the trees and the darkening sky above, but there was something strange about it. The stream shimmered as if holding the reflections of countless stars, even though the sun had not yet fully set. Ira knelt by the water, entranced. She reached out to touch it, her fingers grazing the surface. The water was cool and alive, sending a pleasant shiver through her arm. As she leaned closer, she noticed something even more remarkable. The melody she had heard wasn't just floating in the air. It was coming from the stream itself. Each ripple produced a delicate note, and the stones at the bottom seemed to glow faintly, vibrating with the rhythm of the song. Ira watched, mesmerized, as the water danced over the stones, its currents creating an endless, soothing symphony. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice startled her, and she turned quickly to find its source. Sitting on a smooth, flat rock by the edge of the stream was a small otter, its sleek fur glistening as if it had just emerged from the water. Its bright, mischievous eyes sparkled in the light of the glowing leaf. "Who?" Ira began, but the otter interrupted her with a wave of its paw. "Relax, I'm not going to bite," it said with a grin. "The name's Luma, and you must be the one the forest has been whispering about." Ira blinked, unsure whether to feel alarmed or amused. "You can talk." "Of course I can," Luma said, hopping down from the rock and padding toward her. "Everyone here can, if you're listening properly." Ira tilted her head, considering his words. "I suppose that makes sense," she said softly. Luma chuckled. "You're a quick learner. Most humans take a while to catch on." The otter stretched lazily, then gestured toward the stream with one paw. "Lovely, isn't it? The singing stream. It's one of the forest's oldest treasures. Every note it sings is unique, never to be repeated." Ira looked back at the shimmering water, her heart filling with awe. "It's like it's alive," she murmured. "It is," Luma said simply. "Everything here is alive, one way or another. The stream has been here for ages, singing its song to anyone who takes the time to listen." Ira watched the water for a moment longer, then turned back to Luma. "Why does it sing?" she asked. Luma gave her a thoughtful look. "Why do birds sing? Why do people hum when they're happy? Some things don't need a reason, they just are. Ira nodded slowly. It's beautiful, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Luma's expression softened. You've got a good heart, human. Not everyone notices the beauty around them. That's why the forest chose you. The forest chose me? Ira asked, surprised. Luma nodded. It doesn't just whisper to anyone, you know. You must have something you need to learn, or something you need to let go of. Ira looked down at the glowing leaf in her hand. I suppose I do, she admitted. The otter studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the stream. Well, whatever it is, the forest will help you figure it out. But first, you'll need to cross. Ira glanced at the stream, its surface rippling gently. It didn't look particularly deep, but the stones glowed with an otherworldly light, and the melody it produced seemed almost sacred. Cross? She asked hesitantly. Don't worry, Luma said, hopping onto one of the stones. I'll guide you. Just step where I step, and don't rush. The stream is kind, but it doesn't like carelessness. Ira nodded and took a deep breath, steadying herself. She watched as Luma hopped gracefully from one stone to the next, each step causing the water to hum a slightly different note. Clutching the glowing leaf tightly, she stepped onto the first stone. The moment her foot touched it, she felt a faint vibration, as though the stone was alive beneath her. The water around her shimmered, and the melody seemed to shift, its notes growing softer and more welcoming. Good, Luma called over his shoulder. Now the next one. Easy does it. Ira followed carefully, placing each foot exactly where Luma directed. As she moved across the stream, she felt an overwhelming sense of calm wash over her. The song of the stream seemed to echo in her chest, resonating with something deep inside her. When she reached the other side, Luma hopped onto the bank and turned to face her, his small paws resting on his hips. See, that wasn't so bad, was it? Ira smiled, relief and gratitude flooding her heart. Thank you, she said. Don't mention it, Luma replied, giving her a toothy grin. Just remember, the forest helps those who trust it. Keep listening, and you'll find your way. The otter gave her a playful wink, then darted off into the undergrowth, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. Ira stood by the stream for a moment longer, her gaze lingering on its shimmering surface. The melody had softened now, fading into the gentle whispers of the trees. She turned back to the path, the glowing leaf in her hand lighting the way forward. As she walked, she couldn't help but smile. The forest was strange and mysterious, but it was also kind. Whatever lay ahead, she felt ready to face it, her heart buoyed by the song of the singing stream. Chapter 4: The Meadow of Dreams. The path ahead widened, the dense trees giving way to a soft expanse of golden grass that shimmered like spun silk in the dim light. Ira stepped cautiously into the open space, the glowing leaf in her hand illuminating her surroundings. The air here felt different, thicker, charged with something she couldn't quite name. It was peaceful, but also deeply still, as though the forest was holding its breath. The whispers that had accompanied her so far faded to a faint murmur, replaced by a subtle hum that seemed to come from the earth itself. In the distance, a gentle breeze stirred the tall grass, causing it to sway in rhythmic waves. Ira stood in awe, taking in the meadow's vastness, its golden glow pulsing like a heartbeat. As she walked further into the meadow, she noticed flowers scattered among the grass. They were unlike any she'd seen before, delicate blooms of every color imaginable, their petals glowing softly as though lit from within. Some seemed to pulse faintly, in perfect time with the rhythm of the meadow's hum. Drawn by their beauty, Ira knelt beside a cluster of pale blue blossoms and reached out to touch one. The moment her fingers brushed the petals, a strange sensation washed over her. It wasn't just the softness of the flower she felt, it was something more. A memory rose in her mind, vivid and bright, as if she were reliving it. She was a child again, sitting on the porch of her home with her mother. The warm sun bathed them in light as her mother hummed a soft tune, weaving flowers into a crown for Ira's hair. She could hear her own laughter, high and carefree, and feel the gentle touch of her mother's fingers as she placed the crown on her head. The memory was so real, so tangible, that Ira gasped, pulling her hand away from the flower. The vision faded, and she was back in the meadow, the blue blossoms glowing faintly at her feet. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. A warm breeze stirred the grass around her, as if the meadow itself was answering. The hum grew louder for a moment, then softened again, lulling her into calm. Ira took a deep breath and stood, her eyes scanning the meadow. More flowers dotted the landscape, their gentle glow casting pools of light on the grass. She began to walk, her steps slow and deliberate, drawn to the blooms as though they were calling to her. Each flower she touched revealed a new memory. The day she learned to ride a horse, her father's proud smile as he guided her, a rainy afternoon spent with her best friend, their laughter echoing as they splashed through puddles, the quiet nights she spent stargazing, her heart filled with wonder at the vastness of the sky. The memories were vivid and powerful, but they weren't always happy. Some brought tears to her eyes, like the time she had to say goodbye to her childhood home, or the moment she realized her grandmother's hands were no longer strong enough to braid her hair. Yet even the sad memories didn't feel overwhelming. The meadows seemed to cradle her emotions, allowing her to experience them fully without being consumed by them. As she walked, the whispers returned, mingling with the meadow's hum. They weren't words exactly, but they carried a meaning she could feel rather than hear. They spoke of acceptance, of the beauty in holding both joy and sorrow close to the heart. Eventually, Ira came to the center of the meadow, where a single large flower stood. It was unlike the others, a magnificent bloom with golden petals that seemed to shimmer like sunlight. The air around it was warm, and the whispers grew louder as she approached. She knelt before the flower, hesitating. "What will you show me?" she murmured, her voice soft. The golden flower pulsed gently, inviting her touch. Ira reached out, her fingers brushing its petals, and the world around her seemed to dissolve. She found herself standing in a dreamscape, a place where the sky was an endless swirl of colors, and the ground beneath her feet was soft and luminous. The air here was thick with whispers, louder and clearer than ever before. Ira felt both weightless and grounded, as if she were part of the dream itself. Shapes began to form in the air around her, images of herself at different moments in her life. She saw herself as a child, wide-eyed and full of wonder, running through the fields outside her village. She saw herself as a teenager, wrestling with fear and uncertainty as she tried to find her place in the world. And she saw herself as she was now, standing in the forest, searching for something she couldn't quite name. The images surrounded her, each one vivid and alive. Ira felt an overwhelming urge to reach out to them, to comfort the frightened teenager, to laugh with the carefree child, to reassure her present self that she was exactly where she needed to be. As she reached out, the images began to dissolve, merging into a single radiant light that hovered before her. The whispers coalesced into a single voice, soft, warm, and unmistakably her own. "You are enough," the voice said. "You have always been enough." Ira felt tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of acceptance. She closed her eyes and let the words wash over her, filling the empty spaces in her heart. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the meadow. The golden flower glowed softly, its petals shimmering as though reflecting her own light. Ira stood, feeling lighter than she had in years. The meadow's hum was softer now, a gentle lullaby that urged her forward. Ira looked around, the glowing leaf in her hand bright and steady. The path ahead seemed clearer, though she knew the journey wasn't over. "Thank you," she whispered to the meadow, her voice carried away by the breeze. As she stepped back onto the path, she felt the whispers guiding her once more, leading her toward the next chapter of her journey.